Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the first Project Zazi intro to social action here on YouTube. So you may be familiar with what Project Zazi is, what we do, and you might even be familiar with the introduction to activism series that we're doing on our Instagram page. But what we're going to be doing today is kind of expanded on some of the stuff we've spoken about in those shorter videos on our Instagram and unpacking it in a way that you can sit back and access and return to whenever you feel necessary. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what Project Zazi is and what we do, we are the BAME facing group within Off the Record. So we work with primarily young BAME people aged 11 to 25, and we really are focused on empowering young people through their history, their culture, and their identity to, get them to a space where they can challenge people in society, in school, in work, even, the police or sort of court systems when they feel like they're being misrepresented or mistreated. So that's a little bit about what Project Zazi does. In terms of me, I am the social action lead for Project Zazi, which is why I'm doing this presentation today. So in terms of what I do and who I'm in charge of content like this that goes out into schools, universities, college, in some places, even the workplace, to, again, relay the message of Zazi and get young people familiar with their identity, their history, their culture, and how they can use that to bring about positive change within wider society. So that is my role, and that is kind of why I am doing this particular YouTube presentation. I don't want to call it a webinar, but a digital session for you guys. So some of you who are in some of my school sessions may be familiar a little bit with some of the stuff that I'm going to be speaking about. But because this is more of, a conversation, a chat with me through the kind of internet, there's going to be some new things in here that I'm talking about that I didn't necessarily cover in class, or I didn't necessarily cover in the session entirely. So yeah, if you find this useful, please make sure that you drop us a like and subscribe to OTR's YouTube channel so that we can keep pumping out content like this. So I want to be talking to you guys today about social action. So if I was to ask you, what is social action? What do you think social action is? What would be your gut response? What would be the first thing that kind of pops up into your head? So you can feel free to pause this video here and think about that for a second, or you may already have an idea. But when we're talking about social action, what we're talking about is coming up with a way to express our frustration, express our feelings, express our suggestions for the community or wider society. That is what social action is in a nutshell, I suppose. So as you can see here, when we're talking about social action and getting our opinions and our frustrations and our suggestions into community, social action is all of these things on screen. So yep, it's campaigning. So, a example I like to use more recently is the climate protest stuff. So, marching and raising awareness for global warming and the climate emergency, that is an example of a campaign. And a campaign is an example of social action. You've also got things like volunteering though. So, at Off the Record and at Zazi, we engage with a lot of volunteers throughout the year who are interested in, giving their time, giving their energy, and giving their suggestions to us as a charity to improve the way in which we work with particular groups. So at Zazi, we're very, very interested in having young BAME people come to volunteer with us to give us their first-hand experience of what it's like, to be in school, or what it's like to be in a workplace where sometimes you might not be treated right, or just the general experience of being BAME in Bristol. How is that for you, and how is that translating into your mental health experience? So, volunteering is an example of social action because you're still communicating those suggestions, that frustration, and that experience through the volunteering process. So not a lot of people actually think that social action is linked to volunteering, but it absolutely is. So that's something I really wanted to hammer home here with that definition. And then with these bottom two, I suppose, examples of social action, whether it's blogging, social media, or the expression / art, social media and the blog is a great way for you to communicate those, frustrations, those expressions, and those suggestions with your community. So, this is especially important with blogging, right? Because on places like YouTube, on places like Instagram, on places like Twitter, you can say what you want to a certain extent, but you don't own that platform. Do you know what I mean? Like that's, your platform is owned by Twitter, but with your own personal blog, you own that space. You get to share exactly what you think, what you feel, what you think needs to be done. And you can do it in a way that's unfiltered from those kind of social media channels, right? So blogging and the social media side of stuff is a great way to engage with social action, and it's an example of social action. In terms of expression and art, you all know an artist, whether that's a musician, whether that's a painter, whether that's a spoken word performer, whether that's, I'm trying to think off the top of my head right now, a dancer. There are a number of different forms of expression that communicate frustration or communicate experience, right? So your art is a form of social action if you want it to be, because it can communicate exactly what you feel about culture, about society, about a particular place in society, whether that's the police, whether that's the education system, whether that's the media in general. Your art can communicate those feelings, and therefore that is an example of social action, a way in which you can bring social action into your practice. So what I'm going to do on the next few slides is show you some more recent examples of people who are practicing social action within their careers, past and present as well. So there's going to be a few examples here, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why they're important. So first example is Raheem Sterling, right? So within football, professional football, especially here in the UK, there is still, unfortunately, a lot of racism that is experienced by BAME players, particularly black players. So Raheem Sterling has been speaking out against racism in football, particularly in the professional leagues in England, Scotland as well, and how that is impacting the players' experience and what needs to be done to tackle that. So through that work, we're seeing heavier fines being introduced. It's not totally, gotten rid of, but it's going in that right direction. It's because of people like Raheem Sterling putting that voice out there. So big up to Raheem Sterling. Another example, Stormzy, a great musician, but also very much involved with social action. So his music is, talking about the experience of, being from ends or being from a particular part of the UK, where a lot of people have their ideas of what that's like, and to some extent as well, his music and his art form is talking about what it's like to be black too in Britain, what black British is, and having that work out there expressed through his art form, like I spoke about in the previous slide, is really important, and it's a really important example as to how social action can be ingrained in music and the sort of creative pursuits. So I'm sure you guys know who Stormzy is, but you might not know that he's got his book publishing company. He is always looking for young BAME talent to express themselves through their art form. So that's why for me he's up here as well, because he's not just doing it through music, he's doing it through other creative pursuits as well. So big up to Stormzy. Another amazing human being, Malala. So I'm sure you guys are probably aware of who Malala is, but she was shot for, or attempted to be, her life was attempted, right? Someone tried to kill her because of how outspoken she was in terms of, women's rights and women's education where she was from. And she continually speaks about this, not just in terms of where she's from, but also women's educational rights in general. She's become an activist for this particular area, and she's an amazing human being. And for a lot of people, having their life attempted to be taken away from them is enough to shut somebody up. But she kept going, in many regards, she's even upped the intensity, because that showed her how important that message was. So if you haven't checked out Malala, if you haven't looked at her story, I'm not really doing it justice because it's so deep and it's so detailed. Make sure you check it out after this for some extra reading. So yeah, shout out to Malala. I'm not going to speak too much on this person. I'm sure you are aware of who this person is. Michelle Obama, doing incredible stuff again, for educational rights and access to education in America for BAME. They don't use BAME over in America. At least I'm not entirely. At least I'm pretty sure they don't. But essentially working with access to education for BAME people and making sure that they have the right to access education from a young age all the way through, to university, giving scholarships, those kinds of things. That's why she's on here, and that's why she's an important member of I'm going to call them the Fab, I think I've got 5, if not it's going to be a bit awkward, isn't it? The Fab 5 examples for you guys that I'm giving when it comes to social action figures, that you can kind of look at and attach yourself to. So shout out to Michelle Obama. This final one, boy, the greatest of all time, Malcolm X. So I can't begin to tell you, in terms of history, you're probably aware of, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and you're aware of these people and you're aware of how important these people were. But Malcolm X was as important, if not more important, to making sure that the civil rights movement in America, across the world, continued to progress because of what he was saying, how much he didn't care about who he was offending, how much people he inspired to take similar action. And he's left out of the education system, particularly here in the UK, because to some people his early work was a bit, considered borderline violent or borderline radical. But really, if you look at his work and what he was saying, that was just the way in which media was presenting him and his actions. Don't get me wrong, he said some controversial things. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of his overall message and what he was trying to do, he was one of, if not in my eyes at least, the most influential figure during this time. Rest in peace, Malcolm. You were amazing. And if you haven't checked out Malcolm X, make sure you do. So we've talked a little bit about, who these important people are and why they're an example of, I suppose, social action. But hopefully now we can kind of see why it's important, just even listening to those people's stories, right? But why is social action important? Essentially, I've always said, and off the record I've always said too, that social action is a form of self-care. Helping us, others in the community helps us, and then vice versa. So taking time to better the community is, one of those things that impacts our mental health positively. And if you look at the landscape, especially with young BAME people in Britain and young BAME people in Bristol, our mental health, our lives are being impacted by people in power. So if they're not representing us, if they're not giving us the time of day, then we're going to be impacted by that. We need to speak up about it, and we need to have our opinions, appreciated. So that's why social action is important. That's why we need to start taking this more seriously. So there's a few things that people campaign for. I'm going to not skim over these, but we're going to unpack these in future videos anyway. But in terms of generally what people campaign for, representation. So if you can't see yourself in spaces, then that's a problem. We need to make sure that most, if not all, spaces in society are representing us as young BAME people. Okay, it's not a question of, actually I said most, all of them, all spaces in society have to have a space where we think, yeah, I can do that at some point. The fact that we look at certain spaces and we don't think that shows that there's a representation issue. Racism, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You know what it is. You know, racism has been a theme for many campaigners, especially in the BAME community, for generations now, right? And it's still a problem today. It's just very, very sophisticated racism. And we're going to talk about that in future videos too, right? But racism is something that people campaign for. Lack of access, very similar to representation. You know, for example, as you start getting up the education system, you see a lot less BAME faces. Why is that? Because there's a lack of access. People of BAME descent who get into those spaces and they think, right, this isn't for me. I feel alienated, I feel isolated. That's a lack of access, and that's an issue for us here at Zazi. And it's an issue for, you know, a lot of activists and social action practitioners, I suppose, as well, you know. So lack of access is another thing that people campaign for. And then community conflict. So why is there issues in the community right now? You know, what's the issue? What's causing that? You know, many people in Bristol have campaigned against community conflict and why they think the police are involved in instigating community conflict for generations too. So that's another example of what activists and social action practitioners are kind of campaigning for. Very, very briefly, the benefits of activism. There are lots here. You can pause this, you can read this, and you can see that, you know, this is something that, you know, is really beneficial for you as people that are aspiring to get into social action, or people that are on the fence thinking about it. You know, if you're not sure, you think, oh, it sounds good, but what's in it for me? Pause this video here and look at these benefits, not just in terms of making a difference or that sense of achievement or the experience that you get, but it's good for your CV too. And I'm not trying to market you as a product, guys, but, you know, being involved in these sort of campaigns, or, you know, in these kind of social action projects, it looks good and it makes people take notice of what it is you're doing, and it makes people see that, right, this person is serious when it comes to change and representation, or whether it's racism. It shows that you're serious about what you're doing. So those are some of the benefits of activism. And in terms of the like the characteristics or the attributes of a good activist, here are some skills that you can you know, look at developing or thinking, yeah, I've got that. You know, these are what I would say the top 5 skills for activists or a social action practitioner. Empathy. Can you understand the position of somebody else? Can you communicate your message well? Can you listen to people well? Are you interested in making change? Are you, most importantly, are you approachable? You know, are people not shook of you? Are you able to have that conversation and, you know, let people know that you're open to discussion? And are you collaborative? Are you not just doing this by yourself? Are you working with other people who might have similar experiences to you? And if they do, how can you work together to make the project even bigger? Those are, in my eyes, the top 5 attributes of social action practitioners. So yeah, we've absolutely zoomed through this presentation. And I want to leave you with a question now. I want to leave you with this idea of, we've spoken about social action. We've given examples of what social action could be. We've given examples of people who are using social action, past and present. We've looked at the characteristics. We looked at, you know, the skill set. My question to you now to end this video is, what would you use social action for? When you were listening to me speak, what things were popping into your head thinking, I want to change that? You know, this is something that's important to me. This is something that I feel that I can improve. These are the things that you need to jot down, record, or make a note of somewhere. So when we come back in future videos, we can expand on that in more detail. But that's it from me for now. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, like I said, please make sure you drop us a like, share the video, drop us a comment. We love feedback. And most importantly, subscribe to Off the Records channel. I've been Lewis from Project Zazi. I will see you in a future video. Take it easy, stay safe, and I'll catch you soon.